big storm. Something was really going down here that seemed to really shake them up. And I think that when we think about faith and faithing, I think we have to remember that faith and doubt, in many ways, are not enemies, but they're actually friends. And this is true because if you think back to Psychology 101, and if you think about Piaget for a second, he talked about the difference between assimilation and accommodation, okay? Assimilation works like this. If this water bottle is sort of represents my worldview, the way I sort of hold my beliefs and the way I think the world works, typically what I try to do in my thinking, in my living, in my believing, is try to make sure that everything in my experiences fit into the way I think the world works, right? So if you think of drops of water, of experiences or information that I have over time, in my brain, a drop of water goes in this particular container, and my mind says, it makes sense, it makes sense, it makes sense. I'm assimilating experiences and information I have with the way I think the world works, okay? That's what we try to do, right? We try to make it fit. That's kind of what the human brain does. But that's different than accommodation. Accommodation is when you have a way of sort of thinking about the world, let's say this represents it, and something comes along that doesn't quite fit into the container that I have about how my worldview or the way I think the world works actually happens. So if I were to try to take that organ and put it into this container, what would happen to this container? It would utterly destroy, right? It would deconstruct. It would completely disintegrate, right? This is where people will say they've lost their faith, that they don't believe what they used to believe anymore, that they're not sure if God exists. What's happening at this point is the construction that they have about how the world works isn't able to hold an experience or information that comes their way that can fit into the container of the way they think the world works. And these could be all sorts of things, right? Usually in your 20s, some things happen. You may believe that if I follow these particular rules and follow God to a T and do what everyone tells me to do, then nothing bad will happen to me, but then something does. Well, what does that do to my faith? Or you may think like a relationship is going to last, but then your parents divorce. Or you experience a deep sickness for the first time. Or a friend of yours dies. These sort of experiences that people begin to have in their 20s have to fit somewhere in our thinking. If they don't, something has to deconstruct. Something has to happen for us to accommodate the experiences that are happening. So when those experiences that are bigger than the way I look at the world happen, I have to begin to build a container that can hold these new experiences or these new pieces of information that comes my way. You see what's happening there? So when a storm comes along, it disrupts the way we think the world works. Somehow the disciples thought they could handle it until they didn't. And so this is where we get words like disorientation, deconstruction, shipwreck, lost faith, dark night of the soul. These all describe this sort of a moment when assimilation doesn't work anymore and accommodation has to happen. These are the storms in our lives that happen that are quite dramatic. Now, there's not only a storm, but there's also a boat, okay? Again, brilliant observation on my part, I know. Now, you've already told me that the disciples a lot of them are fishermen, but there was one that was really great out of all of them. That was Peter, right? Now, we find in the story that for some reason, Peter decides that the best solution to being in a storm is to get out of the boat. Okay, he's a fisherman. Next to his net, what is the most important instrument or like possession that he has? His boat, right? And he is going to leave it in this moment. Do you find that absurd? You should. Like, what fisherman leaves his boat in a situation like that? Well, Peter does. Why? I think he realizes that he can't stay in the boat. That whatever's going on here, the boat's not going to make it. And he has to step out of the boat and step toward Jesus, even if he's letting go of the things that he's relied on the most. we psychologically can't live with psychological or epistemological equilibrium. I mean, we need that. We can't live without it. Meaning that the world has to make sense, because if it doesn't, what we begin to do is we begin to create barriers or dichotomies in our lives where everything is separate rather than integrated, okay? What happens a lot of times with young people, especially in their 20s, is that they love their church. They feel a deep commitment to their church. But when the storms come, when the questions arise, they need a community that can hold and carry them through the questions that they have. And if that church is unwilling or unable to help them, they actually have to leave because they have to answer the questions that they're facing, okay? I'm going to propose to you that sometimes when a young person leaves a church, maybe it's not out of unfaithfulness, but it's somehow a faithfulness to Jesus, okay? Now, that's not a rip on the church. I'm not saying that people are doing things bad, but you have to understand that if it's my life, if it's like a life or death situation, I'm going to leave what I love to go after something that can maybe help me if I can't be here, okay? Peter, that's kind of the moment he was in. He was in a life or death situation. He's like, I think I'm going to jump into the stormy water because that seems to make more sense than stay in this boat right now. Okay, that's just where he was at, okay? And so I think we just have to recognize the fact that when young people leave the church, it's not necessarily out of protest. It might be out of desperation, okay? And maybe sometimes our churches can't handle the questions that they have, but you're a networked community, you're a denomination. Like maybe there's another church that can pick up where you left off. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be like, oh no, you're terrible. You can be like, oh, okay, we can't help you, but can we help you get connected with this church over here? Because they may have a ministry or a leader or a mentor or a community that is able to help you work through what we can't help you do here. There's nothing wrong with that. Like we're a network community that allows us to do that, right? The last thing we want to do though is just shame an emerging adult because they're just trying to find their way and we can't help them, right? That's not going to be helpful at all. So this becomes really, really important. There's also this sense of vulnerability, and I think this is really, really important for us to understand, is that when we move into these spaces of faith and doubt, we are really exposing ourselves. Like the world is turning upside down. What worked before doesn't work anymore, and we really are kind of at a loss. And so what I find interesting is that the scriptures talk about this idea that Peter was actually, and the disciples were actually afraid. Okay? Fear is a reaction that comes a lot. And what we learn from our research is that when people move into spiritual struggle and they have these experiences, this idea of anxiety and feeling overwhelmed is a deep part of the emotions that they feel. And so what doesn't help, I think at this moment, is to offer quick fixes in the midst of this vulnerability and this anxiety that they have. What they need is empathy. They need for us to hang in there with them as they're feeling these deep thoughts and working through this vulnerability. And we talked about this morning in Sabbath service, but what's interesting is that we see even in the cheesy movie, and some of you even brought it up, that Jesus steps toward Peter in the moment when he needed it, right? Young people need us to step toward them in their periods of vulnerability rather than stepping away because we're afraid of saying something wrong or we don't know how to get involved. We have to kind of get into the messiness of it because that's where the work is really happening. Now, on top of that, there's also doubt, and we talked about this before. I want to consider you having an imagination about what's happening in this moment, okay? A lot of times when we read this text, we've sort of been trained this way, that we read the text and we get to the point where Jesus says, Peter, why do you doubt? And we think that Jesus is saying it like this, oh, Peter, why did you doubt? Wah, wah. Okay? Is that the way Jesus meant it? Maybe. We don't know in the text necessarily. I can't say the Greek says it that way or anything like that. But if I look at Jesus' life and the way he lived his life, let's just try this on for a second. What if when Peter begins to doubt and he's thinking, Jesus comes up and grabs him and he's laughing. He's like, Peter, you were doing it. You were walking on the water. I know you kind of lost your way for a second and you started sinking. Why'd you doubt, dude? You were doing it. Try it again. See the difference? Like, what if perhaps doubt, we just sort of celebrate that we tried and we asked the questions because we're trying to, in some ways, to have a bigger or broader sense of who Jesus is and how God is working in the world, and we're actually doing that. How can we encourage it and celebrate what's going on there and work with it rather than just quickly shut it down? See the difference? And so I just wonder if we can remember that doubt, in many ways, is part of faith. If we think about faithing, right? If we believe in something, we're not God, so we're going to have a limited understanding of who God is and how God works. So we're all of a sudden going to realize that the way we think about God isn't complete. And so we're going to begin to doubt some of the things we thought about, and then we're going to reconstruct it, and we're going to think about it in new ways. That's the process of spiritual maturity. And so if we can encourage those type of things, I think we can have robust conversations about the way God works in the world. And instead we can sort of laugh and wonder rather than shut down and sort of be Eeyore-ish about faith and doubt, okay? So I love thinking about Jesus that way. Like, I think Jesus, throughout, reread the Gospels with Jesus laughing. I mean, you'll read the Gospels in a totally different way. It'll be really, really great. Also, just notice that there's change. Did you notice that, who did Peter and the disciples think Jesus was before Peter got out of the boat? A ghost, right? And then when Jesus gets back into the boat, what do? They worship him as Lord and God, right? Something ultimately changed in this transformative moment, which is really amazing. I think that we have to remember that sometimes emerging adults will move away from our churches because of school or job or whatever, and sometimes they'll come back. We just need to remember that they're different people than the ones that left. We can't assume that they're middle schoolers all over again or high schoolers all over again. They're part of our communities, but they've had new questions and new ways that they have been growing in their faithing. And so we need to meet them where they're at and recognize the fact that there's change that's happening there. We have to see them for who they are, not who we want them to be, which is really, really, really important, I think. And then I think there's also this idea of worship. I find this really fascinating. When Peter and Jesus got back into the boat, who worshiped? All of them. Who got out of the boat? Peter. Who worships? All of them. This is the contagiousness that I talked about this morning in the sermon, right? When we express acts of faith and doubt, our whole community is blessed. It can turn into a worship experience where we all benefit from the searching and the faithing that's done in our lives. It's quite beautiful if you think about it that way, right? And so I just love that picture of this happening, of everybody worshiping at the end. I want to just pause here for a second and, just sort of ask this question. And again, you can think about this on your own or tonight along the way. But when you think about the scriptures, I think it's really, really great to ask, what did you notice, right? Rather than just telling people what they should see. But then I think also a great question is, who can you relate to in this story? Peter, the disciple that was pulling back Peter to not go because they didn't think it was safe for him? Like, who can you relate to in this story? I think that's really important. And can you think about a time when your faith needed a shift or change and describe what that is like? I find that these stories, in some ways, are almost more powerful than the traditional testimonies that we give. I think that's what I loved about the panels this weekend, is that you didn't give nice, neat, cleaned up testimonies of I was bad and Jesus came and now I'm good. You're kind of like, yeah, I kind of wrestled with this stuff and I'm not really sure what's happening, but this is really cool, but this I don't really know about and I'm still figuring that out. That's faithing. That should be celebrated, and those are the conversations that allow us as a community to continue to grow and make sure that faith is something real and part of our lives, which is really, really great. Pretty good, huh? Okay, a couple other things really, really quickly, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I think when we talk about this idea of young adult ministry and we think about the development of emerging adults and the things that we talked about and about faithing, I think one of the things that we can keep in mind is that one of the ways that we can really attend to emerging adults is to really think about empathy and how we work with that. Empathy is actually not a feeling, it's actually a skill that we have. It's something that we developed where we really seek to understand the others, and we ask the question that I mentioned before, what's good news for young people? Sometimes we're not really good at empathy. It's not that we don't intend to, but there are barriers that are getting in the way, and I was talking with some of you earlier about this. We have a problem sometimes with closeness bias. Closeness bias happens when we believe that when we know something really well, that we stop seeing them for who they are, and we make assumptions about who they are. A lot of times in the way that we relate to other people is more through assumptions than actually seeing who they are, and this becomes a problem. Closeness bias gets in the way of empathy because we don't take the time to listen a little more closely, even if we're familiar with someone that we know. This is why sometimes I think marriages break down. You can be married 20 years but not know each other anymore because you stop seeing each other, right? This happens a lot of times with youth pastors who say, I'm really great with young people, but they assume the young people every year are the same young people, which they're not, right? Closeness bias gets in the way of us being curious about the people that are in front of us, which is crucial in ministry, it's crucial in relationships, it's crucial in life, okay? So that's really important with empathy. The other thing that's happening is that what often gets in the way of empathy is what I call intragenerational speed. We're finding sociologically that the world is speeding up faster and faster. Did you notice with the sociological generations that I gave you earlier of Millennial and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that oftentimes, traditionally, these cohorts have been 20 years, okay? What sociologists and philosophers are saying now is that actually the turnover of generational cohorts is not 20 years, it's more like 5 years. So Generation Alpha, if it's 20 years, there's actually 4 Generation Alphas, okay? And you talk to someone who's in college and their siblings in high school, and you know exactly what I mean. Different social media engagement, different things happening in the world. Life is spinning faster and faster. And so what that does, especially for us older types, is that the spaces of commonality of the ways that we've lived life in the same way are becoming thinner and thinner. So it's harder to say, oh, I know, I can relate to that, okay? It's just harder to relate to each other because life is spinning faster and faster. Now, the implication or the application of that isn't like, well, I guess we got to give up. We really don't know each other. No, the application is this. We just have to lean in harder and not assume that we understand the next generation. We have to be curious about them and learn about them more, right? So this is where empathy comes in. And one of the ways that we can really think about empathy is to think it through the lenses of identity, belonging, and purpose. I touched on a little bit this last night, but let me just unpack some definitions for you that I hope you'll find helpful. When it comes to identity, people, but especially emerging adults, are asking this question, who am I? And this is more than a singular question. For an emerging adult who's developing in their sense of identity and who they are and where they come from, they are working really hard to harmonize their personal attributes, their relationships, their group affiliations, and all that who they are. So the who am I is the harmonization of my religious and spiritual identity, my gender identity, my orientation, my race, my ethnicity, my background. All those things are working together for an emerging adult that's trying to understand who they are. There's a tremendous amount of work to think about this to answer the question, who am I? There's just a lot of work associated with that. And so this is something that emerging adults are working through, and they need a reflective community that says, this is who I see you to be. This is who we believe you to be. This is who we experience you to be. These are the gifts that we see in you. This is the person that you're becoming, right? This is what the community does that we can really help with that. Now, secondly, another question that they're asking is, where do I fit? It's a question of belonging. And what's interesting about belonging that oftentimes gets misunderstood is we only think of belonging as like being welcome. Like, you're all welcome here. This is on all church websites, right? You're welcome here. Like, you know what I mean? It's all of them, right? But what's interesting is that belonging psychologically is not just the extension of feeling welcome. A person, especially a young person, feels like they belong when they feel like their voice is heard and they can contribute to the trajectory of a community. Okay? So it's feeling welcomed, but also feeling as though their voice counts. That doesn't mean that they always get their way. They just want to know, does my voice matter here? There are a lot of emerging adults who've told me that they've been welcomed into communities, but then their voices have been shut down or people don't listen to them, and they don't feel like they belong, okay? So when we invite people and young people into our communities, in what ways are we allowing them to express their voices and their perspectives? Are we giving room for them to share in the imagination of the community? That becomes really, really important to them. And then when it comes to purpose, they're asking the question, what difference can I make in the world? I got a great question for you. Okay, this is what I ask my students all the time. I ask them, what's your gift to the world and how are you developing it? Okay? Now notice what I assume about that question. Number one, they have a gift. A lot of them don't think that they do. Right? What's your gift to the world? And then the second question kind of ties into what we talked about with Meg J before. Like, this is a period of investment. In what ways are you developing that gift that's for the world, okay? Emerging adults sometimes have a hard time asking this question, but I'll tell you something. Their friends can answer that question for them. Let me tell you about my friend. This is their gift. And this is the way I see them using it, right? This is a beautiful thing for them to begin to work out and begin to articulate because it helps them articulate their purpose in the world. The other thing with empathy that's really, really important is this, and I still have a little bit of time, so I'll unpack this. A lot of times I think what happens in churches is that we get so worried about people's behaviors, but we don't think about their narratives. So what we end up doing is policing their behaviors and calling foul when they're out of line, or touchdown or whatever if they do a great job. I know I kind of mixed up my metaphors there, but you know what I'm talking about, okay? But the reality is this, is that I think that people say and behave in ways that are completely congruent with the ways that they think the world works and the narrative that they're living, okay? If they're sort of the center in their narrative, they will operate in a way that's congruent with the way they think the world works, okay? So this is a really great example. Like if I think the world is competitive, see on the far right, my identity will be like, I'm a competitor. There's only so much resource in this world. You might be my friend, but ultimately it's between you and me, and it's going to be me, right? There's only one job, I'm going to get it. I don't care about you, but I really care about me, right? Daniel, I'm really pointing at you. I'm not like, no offense, okay? Belonging, I succeed to be accepted by those who value me for what I accomplish, okay? So all of a sudden, belonging is about me contributing and accomplishing. It's not unconditional. It actually has to do with that. And then my purpose is I have to win and I have to keep winning. Okay, think about a life like that, right? We hear this all the time, like, the Dodgers win the World Series, and what's the first question that always happens right after they won it? So are you going to win it again next year? I'm like, the confetti's still falling, and we're already, it's not enough, right? Emerging adults hear this all the time. You just graduated. At the graduation party, someone's like, so what's next? Like, I'm still eating my cake. Okay? Do you see how we reinforce those sort of narratives? And so if my narrative is that I'm a competitor, this is the way I'll think about my identity, belonging, and purpose. Now, I've got other examples here. Sometimes the world is dangerous, and I'm a survivor, and I seek to find a place that's safe, and my purpose is to avoid risk and self-preservation. Sometimes that's not a narrative I choose. It's one that's been given to me because of nefarious things that have happened to me, right? Now, again, I'm not trying to clean it all up nice and neat at the end, but if we thought about the gospel for a second, and the narrative is God has made the world, rescues us, and invites us to co-create in the world. My identity is I'm made in the image of God. I seek community where I can give and receive and give, and my purpose is to live the best version of me to make this world a better place. You see how our identity and belonging and purpose are often shaped by the narratives that we have. So the question that we have to ask ourselves when we think about ministry and we think about leading and we think about discipleship is, do we know the narratives of the emerging adults that we are working with? What is the operating system that actually animates the choices and the decisions and the language that they use? If all we do is monitor their behaviors, we are superimposing our narrative on them and we miss the real work that happens. Because in the end of the day, you'll never change people's behaviors, but you can invite them toward a better narrative. And the gospel is a better narrative. It's a better way to live, right? So let's change the narrative. Let's not just change behavior. This is the work that I believe that we need to do. So again, I'm going to just let you talk about this tonight, but just more questions. Like, what's the current narrative that young adults that you know live by? I mean, maybe just think about people that you know. And if you're not sure, ask them about this. I think it's a great question. And how might it help you to understand their behaviors and reactions, right? When we see them do something, instead of saying, that's terrible, rather say, I wonder what motivated that. What's the story that's there? I think about this all the time with my students. Every class, when I have an in-person class, I pray and I imagine that their lives are spilling into my classroom for 3 hours. Where did they come from? What are they holding? What are they excited about? What are they lamenting? Where are they distracted? What are they loving? That shapes and changes the way I teach and the way I attend to my students. If all it is my class, you show up and you better do what I say, then we basically dehumanize them in our classroom. And I don't think that helps any of us. Certainly doesn't help me learn from them either, right? So this is what I think we're called to be about, which can be quite lovely and quite helpful. And this is sort of rooted in this idea of being vigilant about empathy as we think about these things. So with that, I think I am going to stop, right? And we'll go to Q&A. Okay, well, let me do one final thing then. You guys are all wearing black jackets and you're scaring me. I guess I'm wearing one too. So this is in my book, Young Adult Ministry Now, but let me just tell you how practically we thought about this. So this is what I did. We worked with a bunch of different churches and over the course of a year to really think about ministry to young adults. And we got feedback from churches as they explored this. And our teams were made up of adults, but also young adults. We always at least made sure that there were 50% of young adults in the room of anything that we did because we wanted great representation. But I gave them an assignment in part of their cohort, and the assignment was this. This is really brilliant, okay? This is why they pay me the big bucks. I said to them, okay, churches, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go back to your communities, and I want you to listen to emerging adults. They're like, what? I'm like, I want you to go listen to emerging adults. And they actually, I'll be really honest with you, some of them are really offended by that. They're like, what do you think we do? Like, why would you ask us to do such a rudimentary thing? I said, I understand. I said, given what we've talked about, here's some questions to help you. I want you to go back and just try to listen to their stories and listen to them about how they talk about their identity, belonging, and purpose. To their credit, they were gracious. They smiled and nodded, and they went off and they actually did it, okay? And what we did is we had them write a summary of what they heard from young adults. So this is like over 40 churches. We collected all these summaries, and then I made a summary of the summary, really trying to code it and try to really see where the themes were and everything else. And we came up with this young adult vignette, okay? This is how churches heard young adults talk about their lives, okay? And so I want to read parts of it to you. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the parts in the green just because it's a bit long. But this is the fruit of pastors and leaders and mentors and disciplers like you listening to young adults. And here's what they said. And you don't have to do anything more than just kind of let it sink in and listen. And this is what they said. We're compassionate, loving, creative people raising more questions than we have answers. It's likely we'll define ourselves more by who we're not than who we are. Community and home are elusive concepts. For us, home is about the people we're with, not the place we're at. Our search to belong is one of the most pressing quests, greatest stressors, biggest disappointments, and loneliness endeavors. We want to make it in this world. We try to do it all in hopes that something might stick. Our uncertainties eclipse our opportunities. Racial, gender, and economic obstacles add to this challenge. Our internal obstacles of self-doubt and perfectionism are just as real. We all feel behind, always trying to catch up in some part of our lives. We're anxious, sometimes at dangerous levels, As the world expects so much of us and we expect so much from ourselves, it seems incredibly easy to let everyone down. Even God, who is simultaneously good and vague and distant and caring and confusing. We love our churches who have given us support and hope in our best and worst of times. Still, we find churches confusing. They don't like our friends or just can't see them the way we do. They're uncomfortable with gray area topics, but that's where we live. Sometimes it's hard to break in. We wish they'd admit they're working through their own stuff rather than just trying to fix us. At times, we've been hurt by them. We just need them to know that. Offering an apology would mean more to us than offering another program. Remember that our lives are in motion, so we may not stay long, no offense. Churches, just don't give up on us. You offer good news to us, and we can offer good news to you too. You know, what's good news to an emerging adult, a young adult? Maybe they're telling us, and we just need to use the wisdom and the skill that we have in our communities to respond to that. The great news is this. I think you can. I think there are flashes of beauty happening everywhere, and if we can continue to do things like this, I think that we can move the needle. And I think that we can make a difference for a generation and generations to come. And so I want to thank you for your investment in this generation and the heart and love that you have. May you know that your labor is never in vain. And I, for one, am a big fan. Peace. 429, Jeff. 429.
Well, wow. Thank you so much, Dr. R. You've given body, I think, to many of our experiences, bringing further clarity to our situation. With clarity comes deeper questions. It's kind of beautiful about clarity, right? You're kind of inspired with questions. This is that time now. So, one at a time. What questions do we have? So we raise our hands and we'll go ahead, and this is the time for us to have any questions we have answered. Do we have any questions for Dr. Argue at this time? Anything at all? Okay, there we go. What's your name, brother?
Alex. My name is Alex.
Hey, Alex.
My question is maybe not only for myself, but for others. For us that don't feel like we always have a community, how do we either create a community, especially a community of faith, around us so that we can get that support that we need?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really important one. And there's two things that are happening there. One is we could sometimes blame churches for why don't you have anything for us, which you're not saying. But I do think there is a moment, especially in our 20s, because in your 20s where your life is quite in motion, that maybe part of your faith journey is to seek out a few friends that at least have a similar belief system as you and commit to each other to really fostering that faith along the way. I think what churches can do in that moment is they don't need to provide a small group or a program for you, but sometimes I think pastors are really willing to help you think about, well, what if we got people together, what resources should we use? What can we talk about? Or maybe they can be a resource if you're leading the group in some ways to be a mentor for you to sort of negotiate that along the way. I think by the time in your 20s, I think that what you need is not more information. You just need a way to talk about how to integrate your faith in your life. And sometimes your peers can really help you kind of work that out. And I think that working out is like any language, right? The only way you do this is by talking about it. And so if you can find a few peers that you trust and care about and kind of grow with, I think that would be a great start. Now, if it turns into a program or something bigger that you want to invite people to, I think that's great. But I think I would keep it small and keep it particular because everybody's schedules are so crazy that it's better to have a few people that can commit than a bunch of people that are coming in and out, because you want one conversation that can go deeper rather than always keeping it on the surface, which sometimes is a problem in emerging adulthood where you may have a lot of surfacey relationships, but because of your in-motion life, the deeper relationships are a little bit harder to find and nurture, and I think those are the ones you're probably really craving. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Thanks. That's a great question. Yeah. So I just say call Christian. Anything you need, just call him.
Yeah, just call me. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Any other questions? We have one back here.
Hey everyone. I have a question, Dr. Arvi. When you have this type of scenario, what would you recommend to begin thinking or begin a conversation or an encouragement to see that this is a big gap, this is a big need,
Yeah.
but it's not being seen as that and it's being tossed aside. So what I'm noticing, and not just in one or two churches, but along life's journey, right? I think for young adults in different ages, whether it's the 18 to the 25 to the 30, whatever, I see that there's less literal financial investment. I feel like there's more attention to the youth, the little kids, children, youth and their teens, maybe even married couples, young adults, right, with little kids. And so I do believe that if we want to produce, you need to make the investment.
Yeah.
But I could relate a lot to what you're saying earlier about we kind of have it backwards. We want to see the return before you put the investment. And to me, that is a literal dollar sign, dollar sign.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, you're not going to have the results that you need or you want because you're not really putting the effort.
Yeah.
Like for me, like for example, one example for this weekend, right? I invite a friend. She's a single mom.
Yeah.
Right? She doesn't have the funds to
Yeah.
even make it here.
Yeah.
I wish that there was something that we could do to pay for Ubers,
Yeah.
for people to come to play, to do more. I don't believe that anything is a waste when it's regarding God. You're gonna get tenfold back, right?
Yeah.
But I do see that there's that like, oof, there's this pressure, it's too much, or maybe
Yeah.
this budget or that, or like
Yeah.
in different ways, in different phases. Even growing up, I mean, for a mission trip, I never made it
Yeah.
on a mission trip.
Yeah.
I was never part of the big, schools, right?
Yeah.
All my friends would talk about, we did this, we did that, I was sponsored by this. When I went to my home church back then to even raise funds to do a simple car wash, there was zero support. They said go to adra.org. When I went to adra.org, the trip cost $5K. I didn't have a job. I was like, it was so hard. I was struggling with my health. So it takes forever, basically, to see that you need to put the money in. You're not going to get the results. And how do we even start a conversation that whatever it is, as much effort and attention and love and care and literal finances being poured out into other age groups, how do we make it more of an emphasis that even if it feels like a waste or it's too much, or we're not going to see the return, or that person doesn't go to this church, or they're not a member of this faith, or this and that, they're in another faith. How do we kind of understand that God has all the resources? He's the owner of the entire earth. And you can spend as much as you want as long as he's leading. And we shouldn't be so stressed out about these things because you need to do this. There's going to be times that I think, how do we even get people to see that it does, if you're really going to be for young adults, God has a budget. And maybe you don't, right? But that might sound offensive because it kind of steps on everyone's toes, or there's all these problems. So to me, I'm like, how can you help us understand that there's this green gap? And what can we actually do practically as church members, as older generations, as young adults? Like, what is it that we can do to begin to heal this scenario happening in like a redundant circle? Because it's been like, what, now 3 decades for me that I've seen that happen, and I've seen people leave because they're just not, there's no real support. I mean, even if you're in between jobs, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, church needs to be more of the mother figure that maybe someone's lacking. And I learned that through a pastor when I went to a church retreat when I was like 20. And it seems like there's that gap, and it seems to even get bigger and bigger, especially after the pandemic, I think. So if you can help us understand a bit more on that, please.
Okay, thanks for the really simple question. No, I really appreciate it. And you asked, how did you get the conversation started? I think you just did. So thank you for that. And let me just say, I love your heart and the compassion that you're expressing about thinking about the fact that whether we intend to or not in churches, programs implicitly can exclude people without us intending it to happen, right? The cost of a trip, a particular time of an event, if there's no childcare, this brings barriers for certain people to be able to access some of the things that we want to perhaps provide simply because of those sort of limitations. And so I think it's important in any sort of event or things that we put on that we sort of think about, well, who are we trying to invite and who are we excluding, not by intention, but simply by the way the logistics have set up, and is there anything we can do to kind of close those gaps? And so I think you're asking some really, really brilliant questions that are really important. A little bit of background. We surveyed young adult ministries, and we asked them what their budgets were for young adult ministry, like across the board. And I'm going to get this wrong, so you can't quote me on this. But the number of churches, it's at least 50%. I want to say 70%, but I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to say 50%. Their budget was 0. Okay? And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. And again, that's not a judgment statement. This is just what they told us. There's no budget, right? And so I think that your impression, my point is, from our data, your impression is true, okay? And I think we have to ask ourselves a hard question as to why that is. So what I would say to church leaders is, if ministry is about return on investment, and we're only going to go after, I'm being really dark here for a second, but just like, I'm going to turn it in a second, all right? Because I've been a senior leader, so I know what this is like. Like, if we only go after like children's ministry because we know that the parents will come and they're the ones that have the money and that will help the budget, that's probably not a great way to think about ministry, though I get it, right? Young adults, emerging adults, don't have a lot of money, so we're not going to put a lot of time into them because we don't know if we're going to really get much back in the coffers, right, or whatever it might be, right? And so there's sort of a financial sort of formula that sometimes falls into that. Now, I don't think that churches are being nefarious. I think they're actually trying really hard to steward the money that they have, right? There's only, as much as God is, the God of everything and can provide, which we have to have faith, we also know that we have budgets and we're trying to be steward of the responsibilities that we have, right? And so this is sort of the conversation and the tensions that are associated with that. I do believe, though, and I tell my students this all the time, that a budget is a vision statement. Okay? What you choose to invest in demonstrates what you value. Okay? And if there's no budget, I think we just have to ask why, right? Maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe this year we have to focus on something else, okay? So this isn't like churches hate young adults. It's just that I think we have to ask, why aren't young adults in the vision of the church, if that's what's perhaps going on, right? And I think we can ask that question in a respectful way that maybe opens up new possibilities. I think sometimes the problem with funding is that in other ministries, the funding goes to something more defined. And if the slide that I showed you of sort of Wild West like life of an emerging adult, we don't really know where the money is going all the time. And so it's harder to focus resourcing and giving towards something that's a bit loose at times. So maybe one of the things that emerging adults can do, you can do, is to try to bring definition to how those funds could be used to really bless your peers and those that you care about. Okay? You've brought up a couple things. Maybe childcare. Maybe it's scholarship for certain events. Maybe it's creating resources in such ways that people who don't normally have that opportunity can take advantage of it because they're in between jobs or whatever it might be. Maybe there's a fund to help people that become unemployed to kind of carry them when like funds run out, right? Maybe there's funds toward a tutoring system. Maybe there's funds toward job sharing that has to happen. In our church, we actually got business people and emerging adults together, and we began to sort of ask the question, emerging adults, what are the projects that the church should be thinking about? And we helped them build a vision plan and actually a business plan to ask for funds, of which then the business people who had the money would say, we've helped you with that business plan, and we think that this could actually work. Let's try it for a year. You come back and report on how it's going, and let's see what we can develop about that. Some of those projects failed. Others turned into a ministry that's still going today in our city, okay? So there are creative ways to match vision to funding. And I think if we can think creatively about how we can bring those to light and make them connect, I think, again, there's possibility. Because I think deep down, and I shared about this a little bit this morning in Sabbath service, I think intentions are good. I think there's just sort of a miss in how that happens. And what we need is better conversations and clarity about what's doing it. And just your comment today already evoked, I think, an imagination in me and maybe some others in this room. And so I would say keep having those conversations. And maybe there's some leaders in your church that you can actually sit down and kind of say, okay, if we had money, what would we do with it? I had an elder in my church who would always come up to me and goes, Steve, if I wrote you a check for $10,000 right now, what would you do with it? I'm like, I never thought about that. He's like, well, then go think about it. And I was like, okay, so if someone gave me $10,000, what would I do with it? Like, I think every emerging adult, like, that would just be a great thing. If someone gave you $10,000 right now, what would you do with it? Have an answer, because there's somebody out there that actually wants to write that check. All right? Kind of cool. So, is that helpful? Do you want to come back on anything on that? Okay, great. Thank you for raising that question. You did it in such a beautiful way, and I really honor you for that. So.
So a reoccurring narrative is that young people, come to the older generation to speak on issues or propose ideas, and it often gets dismissed or told it's not a worthy enough problem to even discuss sometimes, or that they continue to assert their own perspectives and expectations of how things should be run, and sticking to routines, sticking to traditions. So I just wanted to ask, what are some possible strategies or methods for those who are more vocal and fighting in spirit to be able to even have a seat at the table, to be able to have productive discussions with older generations within our churches to begin to problem solve on these issues for young people?
It's really, Daniel, really beautiful the way that you said that, and I think it is an example of belonging, right? You don't want to simply feel welcomed, and you don't simply want to perpetuate the vision of other people. You want to bring your voice into the important things that your generation is wrestling with that's unique to you, and you believe the church can be helpful in getting there, right? So I think it's a beautiful example of belonging, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. I don't know about your churches, but in the churches that I've been, sometimes we confuse tradition with orthodoxy. Now, I know they overlap, but I think tradition sometimes is really hard to break away from because it has become so foundational to the ways that we do things and think about things that diverging from that feels like we're being unfaithful to the tradition that we've come from or the people that have invested in us, right? It's not necessarily tactical. It oftentimes is more emotional. And I think we just have to respect that. I think what's interesting, though, is that I think underneath tradition is a deeper tradition. It's a tradition that calls the community to continue to be relevant to the community that we've called to serve. For example, this church. This church probably was built with a vision to be a good neighbor and to bring change in this community and to serve it well, right? So that's the deeper magic that I think we want to appeal to. And it's not so much opinion at that point, it's actually appealing to the deeper tradition. So I think if you can frame what you're passionate about, saying, I actually think this is what we're about, And I think we're actually on the same page. It's just a different way that our generation is thinking about that. I think sometimes others, and maybe other generations, can begin to appreciate the fire and the context associated with that. And sometimes I think it's just a matter of really kind of working out like what people are afraid of, what are the implications of this. But I would hope that if you can continue to articulate what that vision is, you can do that. I just think one thing to remember, and maybe for all of us generations, we just have to remember that every generation has new questions that they feel compelled to answer. As a matter of fact, they have to. And so we have to give grace to that. We stand on the shoulders of the generations that have come before us, that have answered difficult questions and have gone through difficult times. But there are new questions and new challenges that you and your friends have to face right now, and you're looking for support along that way. And I think to continue to champion those things can be really, really important. So I would just say don't give up on that and try to appeal to a deeper tradition that I think collectively our communities actually share. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
I had a question. You made a comment on earlier, and you said you had asked some of your leaders to go back and listen to emerging adults. But you specifically said listen to how they talk about identity, purpose, and belonging. What do you mean when you say listen to how they talk about it?
Oh, wow. Very good. Listen. That's such a great question. So I think what I meant by that was this, is that we didn't say to them, we didn't ask them like, so what do you think your identity is? What do you think belonging is? Like that's, from a researcher perspective, that's coming on too strong and people don't know how to answer that. So to listen for those things, we had a battery of questions that asked them about their friendships, about their family connections, about what their dreams were, about what they were afraid of, about where they felt stuck. And if we listen closely enough through the lenses of identity, belonging, and purpose, they usually map on in some sort of way. Usually people's responses and searches fall in identity, belonging, or purpose. You can literally hear it after a while when you train your ears. Like when someone starts talking about something they're worried about, it's usually a question of perhaps identity, belonging, or purpose. I mean, even when Danielle was talking about what she was talking about, did you notice what I did? I'm like, that's kind of a belonging statement that you're making. This is a deep, profound thing. Now, there overlap. There's also purpose and identity associated with that as well. But it allows you in many ways to kind of map on where people are coming from and what these begin to mean. Then it helps us to know how to answer it. Because otherwise, what we can do, I think, sometimes is respond in ways that actually miss them. Like they're talking about belonging, but we're trying to provide something else for them, right? So we were trying to train leaders to sort of listen for these things, and we had those type of questions. I believe those questions are in the back of my book, the semi-structured interviews as well, so that you can actually use. And if they're not there and I just lied, then email me and I'll give them to you. So I don't think I lied. I hope I didn't lie. I just can't remember. So is that helpful? Okay.
Thank you.
I love that you raised that question, though, because sometimes we have to come at things a bit along the side. Like my research on doubt and faith, I didn't ask emerging adults, like, what do you doubt? Why? Because of Conrad Vitz. No one's going to say anything because doubt is sort of taboo. So what I asked them...
I would have asked. I would be like, so what are you guys doubting?
Yeah.
And which would have been wrong?
Yeah, if people will go, I don't really doubt about anything, but it all got resolved, right? That's kind of what we do. So what I asked them was, hey, can you tell me something that's shifted or changed with the way that you believe or follow God? And they're like, oh yeah, let me tell you, right? Well, that's kind of like doubt, right? Just changing your words slightly open up new narratives that you can try to get to. And that's part of the work that we have to do. Because generally as people, we're pretty guarded, especially with intimate things like faith, right? Like, we can't assume that people will open up to us just because we ask them a question. So we have to gingerly kind of step toward that and begin to show them that they can trust us with their narratives. Narratives are very, very holy things for people. And they protect them in some sort of ways. So we kind of have to cozy up and do that. And that's why ministry kind of takes time, right? You know, so this is the work that I think that we're called to do. I love that you're so sensitive to that, which doesn't surprise me knowing you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, hi.
I write it down, so it's kind of long.
Thank you.
So how can we convince older generation that their ways of doing things are no longer effective with newer generations? For example, I presented the idea of working with social media in a couple churches. Even older generations often see social media like something diabolical or evil, dangerous, you know.
Yeah.
And if they support the idea, they only want to do it on their way, you know. Like, for example, like putting a TikTok with 28 doctrines with a PowerPoint image, weird, you know, like that's not gonna work, you know.
Yeah.
And old music, outdated music, with no connection with younger audience at all. Or, for example, let's work with AI. No, AI is diabolical. You know,
Yeah.
like, no, let's not work with that. Like, this is our generation.
Yeah.
Like, we're different. We're not gonna put a sermon on 45 minutes. You know,
Yeah.
our attention is 8 seconds. I mean,
Yeah.
how can we?
I'm sorry I went over. Yeah. No.
No, I mean.
No. I'm sorry.
It's just like,
Yeah.
when you talk with older people,
Yeah.
like, okay, let's do that, but let's do it in our way, like boring, like, you know, like,
Yeah.
not connection at
Yeah.
all. So how
Okay.
can we convince those people? I'm sorry, old people, but.
Yeah, I think you're talking to me, old people. So I don't think that older types think what they do is boring. I think they actually really believe in it. I know you're just sharing what you're sharing, which I really appreciate. This is what we learned about innovation, and we did a bunch of research on this as well. People are really afraid to change because the familiar is just more predictable than the unfamiliar. Okay, so there's that element. The other element is just an element of trust. Like, we have to learn to trust each other with new things, and so sometimes I think there's just relational trust. So you ask the question, what can we do? Well, I think the more that you can pay attention and be interested in maybe why an older generation does something, and then ask if they can listen to why you want to do things a certain way, that dialogue can help you realize that maybe you're not as far apart as you are. But I think one of the things that we learn the most from churches is a lot of times when it comes to change, churches want to roll out new changes on the big stage, and they say to everybody, hey, everybody, we are doing TikTok, and it's going to be amazing, and we want you all to subscribe right now. And everyone gets anxious because it seems like a big deal, right? And if it fails, then you failed on the big stage, right? What we've discovered is that great innovation starts in the margins. So a way to frame it to maybe some of your older friends is to say, hey, can we experiment with something? Let's not make a big deal out of it, but I'm going to start this TikTok thing, and let's just not really tell anybody. Let's just get it going, and let's see what happens. And why don't you give me input as we move along the way? And if we like it, let's keep moving it and growing it, and then it becomes something. And I think what that does is it lowers the temperature of something being a big deal, and you experiment on the margins until you really feel great about it, and then you let everybody know, hey, you know what, we've been doing TikTok for the last 6 months, and people are really responding to it. We really love you to be a part of it, and then everyone can get on board. You see the difference? So maybe find some ways to just experiment on the margin, and that's just a great phrase. Hey, we want to try something. We want to experiment with it. What do you think about that? People are more palatable to that than, I've got this big social media vision and I want to apply it right now, right? Even though it's probably a great idea. Like, I want you to do my social media. We can maybe talk afterward. That would be great. But I think that can be really, really helpful. Does that make sense? And then I think it develops that trust and consistency that allows that to happen.
Yeah, for example here, Pastor Christian and Zach, they were very open with the idea of working with social media, but that's 1 in 1,000 cases, you know, like not everybody, especially pastors or all elders, you know, they're like, no, we're not gonna work with that. So it's a barrier for me. Like, this is faster. You said it. Like, this is going fast. Everything, technology, innovation, and everything.
Right.
Maybe there's a lot of young people here that have great ideas, but they don't listen to us. I think that's part of being a community, that we have to learn how to work together. But I think if you can continue to educate those that are older than you of how you think this might work and what you can do, I would just keep educating them and helping them see the value of it. So we have to educate them?
Yeah, I think you actually do, and I think it's okay. And I don't think you have to wait for permission for it. If you are a part of a community and you have a voice, then say, this is the vision, this is what I think God is calling me to, and this is the way I think I can do it. And I want to inform you along the way, but I would love to be able to do this. So I think that that's fine. I don't think that's being disrespectful. I mean, I wouldn't run off and start a rogue church on TikTok necessarily, which you're not going to do. But I do think that you have voice and you have agency, and you're old enough to be able to do that. I think anytime you can invite people along the way to cheer you on, I think that makes your vision better. But run with that passion and that vision. You've demonstrated today. You've definitely got passion. Like, lean into that. That's your gift, right? And I think that people will catch up to that along the way, right? Okay, I love it. Thank you for that question.
Hi. So I am a child of educators and also Christian education.
Yeah.
And something that my mom teaches high school in particular, and something that she's kind of fearing because she also teaches freshman religion specifically.
Yeah.
A majority of her kids now have no clue what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of cultural, but also a little bit of they just, even if they're Adventists, they have no clue what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I just heard her mention offhand is, what can I do as a teacher, and going forward, how can I actually touch them?
Yeah.
And I think her, at least from just the impression she's giving me and what I've just heard her offhand saying about just her other classes, she's a history teacher, is she's just so worried about what am I presenting to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your mom. What a great heart. Tell her that. That's fantastic.
I will.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so lovely. You're right. I mean, what she's picking up on is true. The sort of the base knowledge of a Christian tradition is less and less. And this isn't necessarily the kids' fault, is that the parents also don't have a base knowledge. So what we begin to see, and we see this historically, is there's this sort of diminishing base knowledge that happens over time with generations, and this becomes a problem, right? So as educators, if I could put that on for hat on for a second, I think we just have to think really carefully about our starting points, right? So if I were perhaps, and I kind of did it a little bit with you all here, but if I were to give my little Matthew 14 thing that you're all going to steal and use at your next class, which I hope you do, what I would probably do is not assume that they know what the gospel is, or that there's a New Testament or an Old Testament. I literally have slides that say, did you know that there's 66 books in this thing called the Bible? And here we are in the Bible. We're way over here in the New Testament. A whole bunch of stuff has happened. And not only that, but like Matthew is like basically giving this sort of story of Jesus, and we're like halfway through the story, and there are highs and there are lows. We're going to talk about a low right now, and this is what's kind of going on there. You know, what you actually have to do is probably give more backstory than ever before to get them to the point to talk about the things that you're going to talk about. If we assume that they understand these things, then it's just sort of Jesus flags flying all over, and that doesn't really help. I do think, and you probably know this as an educator and your mom as well, is I do think there's this technique of wondering, that we need to invite our students to recognize the fact that they actually have a God-given imagination. They are image bearers, right? Can they wonder about the story with us and allow the Spirit to actually connect what they're thinking about with their lives? And a lot of times, there's more connections than we give them credit for. It's just not going to be the straight and fast way that's normally there. So there's a new onus on us as teachers and as leaders and disciplers to actually not make assumptions about where people are at. And I would say the same thing for parents as well. A lot of times in our churches, we're like, parents, you're the primary disciplers of your kids. And parents are like, I haven't been discipled. So if we're going to make that vision to parents to disciple their kids, we better follow it with support, right? So there's expectation and support, right? You know this in education, right? Whatever expectation we give, we better follow it with support, or all we're doing is we're setting up people for failure, and nobody wants that for the people that we love. Yeah, excellent.
Now, I know there's more questions, but I promised Steve that he'd been invited. Did you know today is his wife's birthday? So we want him to go home a really loved and appreciated husband.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
very important.
Ramen dinner, we're going out for dinner tonight.
All right, so how many of you have been blessed by Steve today, huh? All right. If you guys know me, you know I come from Hawaii. We're going to do something like an Ohana thing. We're going to say 4 words to Steve. On 3, we're going to say, we love you, Steve. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. We love you, Steve. You're part of our family now, Steve.
Oh, man, I feel so blessed. Thank you.
What a blessing. Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Dr. Steve Argue.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, now, we talked about money. I want you to know, so in the back of the room is somebody who you don't know, but you're going to get to know in a second. So I had no idea about Steve. I had no idea about young adult life. I had no idea what any of this was until I got a call from my friend, Pastor Randy Hill. Now, Pastor Randy Hill is the leader at the Pacific Union of Youth and Young Adult Ministries. He called me and said, hey, Jeff, do you want to have Steve Argue and Young Adult Life Tour come to Southern California? And I said, what? So he called me, introduced me to it. Not only that, Ivana, you talked about money. Pastor Randy said, hey, I have some money to help you help this happen. So he gave us money to make this thing happen along with all of us. So Pastor Randy's in it. Pastor Randy, stand up so we can give you a round of applause. Thank you very much, Pastor Randy.
He is such a good guy.
I honored my promise to you that you would not say anything from the front of the room. That's the only promise I made to you. Let's be clear. All right. Next up, my One House team. If you're One House team, stand up. One House team is the one who plans these events for all the young adult ministries in Southern California. Please stand up. All right. So thank you. I'll have a seat. So today, during our tabletop exercise, we really want to know from you, how did you like today? Your honest feedback. What was great? What could we do better? And then what do you want to see more of in the future? So if you want to shape the young adult ministry in Southern California, tonight's a good opportunity. So we're actually going to ask you to write it down so Pastor Zach and Christian will give you some instructions. The reason is we want to take that, we're going to pray over it as a group, and we're going to take your suggestions into the future to give you more of the things you're asking for, okay? Next up, there's a smaller planning committee. So Pastor Zach, Pastor Christian, Pastor Cindy, and Pastor Anthony, stand up. This is the Vallejo Drive and Eagle Rock team that have been planning this event, so thank you very much for all the legwork that you did. All right, so Anthony, Cindy, sit down. No, you two keep standing up. All right, now, Eagle Rock, thank you, church family, for hosting us. I gave all the hard work to do to Zach and Christian and Kim. Where's Kim? Kim, stand up, Kim. So I want to thank the three of you for making this weekend happen. You guys have been amazing. Thank you, have a seat. And then Eagle Rock leaders and church family, thank you for hosting us.
Yes.
One of the things about the Young Adult Life Tour, you have to go to a church where young adult ministries are alive, and the church wants to support it. This has been seen at Eagle Rock, so thank you for making that happen. So my last thing before I let you guys go, if you registered for this event on the QR code, it means I have your email address, you will get copies of the presentations that happened this weekend. If you did not sign up and you're having regret, you're having small kind FOMO, as we would say in Hawaii, small kind FOMO, okay? You can see these two gentlemen over here, and they may open the ARC door and give you an opportunity to catch your contact info. I didn't say, I said maybe. We want to know how to contact you to let you know more about these events in the future, okay? I think the QR code does work unless Pastor Zach turns it off. I don't know. He has the power, just so you know. As you know, I have no power. You guys all have the power. But listen, before we leave, Steve, please come up. I want you to all stand up, and we are going to pray a prayer over this man, that he will continue to be a blessing to churches and students and all of the places he comes in contact with in the way that he's been a blessing to us. Is that okay? Now, we're going to do a little old school style. I want you all to raise your right hand. We're going to pray this prayer of this man, all right? You ready? Bow our heads. Father God, we've met a new man that we love, Steve Argue. We thank you for him. We thank you, Lord, for his family that supports him. We thank you for the seminary that supports him. We thank you for his students. Lord, we thank you, Lord, that you've raised him up and that you've called him to educate us and to help us to learn how to love on our young adults. Lord, we just ask in a mighty way, Lord, that you would continue to bless him. Send a double portion of your Holy Spirit upon him and his family. May his ministry continue to bear great fruit, Lord, and may he see evidence of your leading every single day. Jesus, continue to help him to lift you up so that you can continue to draw people to you through your servant, Steve. We love you, and we ask all these things in your mighty name. Amen. God bless you, friend. All right, so at this point, I'm going to give it to Zach and Christian because I don't know what's happening next, but I know they do, and you guys can have a seat. God bless you all.
Yep. So at this point, we're all gonna, as calmly as possible, make our way out back towards hall where we had lunch. Okay, we have tables set up. We're gonna pass out some pens, some pencils. Before that, okay. Picture. We got the selfie, yes, the Jeff selfie. Right. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so we're gonna make our way back towards hall. Okay, there we will have tables set up. We have pencils to pass out, some prompts for you guys. We have just digested a lot. Now we get to process together while also forming our future as a young adult ministry here in this conference, okay? Let's make our way out there right about now.
Yeah.
And one house team up front.
Yeah.
So see you in Wards Hall, okay. We'll see you there. Bunch of sheep with no shepherds. There we go. Off we go. Yeah.
You'll find it.
We believe.